Hi everyone, I am Mara and today is the 20th of March, so one of the most important days of the year because it's World Storytelling Day. And that means that there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of stories being told around the entire world as we speak. And this is another story. So my story today comes from somebody called Matsuo Basho, who was a 17th century poet, genius, very smart person. And his story is of a poor farmer who lived in a tiny little village at the foot of an enormous mountain. He stayed with his old and aging mother, and even though they didn't have very much of anything at all, they were still happy and peaceful. But unfortunately for them, the province was ruled by a cruel and despotic leader. He'd been a warrior, taken part in many battles, won them all, and the things that he valued more than anything else were strength, might, and power. And the things that he frowned upon were what he considered weak and fragile. And because of this, he came up with a terrible law. He decided that the old people who lived in the province were pretty useless, had had their time, and so he decreed that all the old people had to die. Well, when of course the people in the province heard this law, they were outraged, horrified. How could they possibly do this to their old people? But they knew how cruel the governor was, and they knew that they had absolutely no choice. And so this terrible custom began. The poor farmer, he knew that his mother was getting older, and very soon her time would come too, and he began to consider what might be the kindest way that he could let his mother die. The day approached, and with a heavy heart, he started to prepare her favorite meal. He placed the delicious food into a little box and placed it in a bag. He filled a bottle with cool, fresh, sweet water and placed that in the bag too. And then he lifted his helpless mother onto his back and firmly tied her on. And they slowly began to make their way up the enormous mountain behind the village. Now the road was long and narrow, but up they climbed. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Pakatang, pakatang, pakatang. Higher and higher. And the old mother on his back noticed how sometimes he would stumble over the stones or he would trip over the branches. She noticed how as they climbed higher, that little road began to merge with the paths of wild animals and hunters, and she saw how sometimes her son would mutter under his breath when he became lost or was confused. She began to get increasingly anxious. How was her son going to ever find his way home? She decided to take action. She began to snap the twigs of the branches of the trees around them, and every now and again she would drop a handful of twigs onto the path so that he would find his way home. Higher and higher they climbed, and as the sun began to move across the sky, they could hear the sounds of the animals in the forest. The owls hooting, the wolves, woo! The groans and the squeaks, higher and higher, and the journey became slower and slower as the burden on his back became heavier and heavier. But as they reached the summit, the farmer looked around and he found a little protected area, and he thought that perhaps this would be where his mother would be safest for longest. He gently lowered her to the ground, and he found pine needles and spread them everywhere, creating a soft cushion. He placed his mother gently onto the pine needles, gave her her favorite food, and let her drink that cool, fresh, sweet water. And with a heavy heart, he kissed her on her head and turned to make his way home. But just as he was about to leave, his mother turned to him and said, "Wait!" One word of advice. "Please take care. This mountain is full of danger. There are wild animals. There are ravines. There are rocks. You could trip and hurt yourself. You might get lost. So, look on the ground and you will see little piles of twigs. Follow that path and you will soon find yourself in familiar ground." the son, looked at the ground, and there he saw the little trail that his mother had left. He saw her hands that were soiled and scratched, and as he considered this little act of kindness, his heart broke. He turned and he raced towards her and he said, "Mother, I will never leave you here. This is crazy. What was I thinking? I've really become a fool." And he picked her up, tied her onto his back, and they started to make their way down the mountain. And he swore to his mother that no matter the consequences, even if they had to die together, he was willing to take that risk. As they approached the house, the farmer waited until the shadows were around, and he quickly snuck his mother back into the house. Now, right in the kitchen, there was a little closet in the wall where he kept the food. He cleared it out and he placed his mother inside that closet. And over the next few weeks and months, he would feed her and bring her water to drink, and they would tell each other stories. But he was very careful not to get caught. But after a few months, just as he was beginning to feel safe, the governor announced a new law. He decided he wanted to set the villagers a challenge. Perhaps it was a show of strength and power, but he insisted that they had to produce a rope made of ash. The villagers were horrified. A rope made of ash? What madness was this? What crazy idea! It was an impossible task. But they knew the consequences if they did not produce what the governor wanted, and so they set to work. They gathered into groups, they explored, they tried new things, they failed and they failed and they kept on failing, and nobody could come up with something that resembled anything like a rope of ash. And in desperation, the farmer told the story to his mother, and she said, "I might be able to help. I think I have an idea." She told her son to get some straw, and that straw he was to weave it and tie it into a rope. And then, on a windless night, he was to lay that straw rope onto a slab of stone and set fire to it, and that might produce what he needed. The farmer did as his mother had requested, and indeed it worked. It was a beautiful rope of ash. Every fiber, every thread revealed itself in the moonlight, and the governor was called. And when he saw the rope, he was amazed, utterly incredulous. He said, "Who has done this? Who has used their intelligence and creativity to such how?" He was speechless, utterly speechless. The farmer stepped forward and he said, "Governor, I created the rope, but I'm afraid I cannot tell a lie. The idea was not mine. I couldn't keep the law that you set the last time, and I allowed my mother to stay with me, and it was she who gave me this advice." And he brought his mother out of the closet, and the governor's face fell. His brow furrowed. He stared at the farmer, and he stared at the mother. He raised his head and he said, "I have been a fool. I placed all the value in our province on the strength of our youth, and I forgot the ancient proverb that a crown of snow has great wisdom." He knew that he needed to place value on the wisdom of the elderly, and so he decreed from that moment that no more elderly would ever be put to death. And so that custom died out, and the only place that you will find it in this day is in stories just like this one.